To all of us, thank you so much for coming through, and welcome to our WASHen 2020 virtual conference. My name is Mbegazeli Mthunzi. I will be your moderator for this conference. It's a 1-hour conference, so we hope that we will be able to cover as much as we can within that time. First, allow me to acknowledge and thank the conveners of this workshop, the Zimbabwe International Trade Fair, in partnership with the City of Bulawayo and the Ministry of Climate Change, Ministry of Lands, Agriculture, Water, Climate and Rural Resettlement. Thank you so much for being able to convene the WASHen 2020, which runs under the theme, Shaping Resilient Cities Through Smart Water and Sanitation Management. Today, our conference will be looking at the impact of climate change and the subsequent water crisis on Zimbabwe's productivity and capacity utilization. So with us today, we have got 3 speakers who will actually be addressing us, and they will address us at a local level. We have the engineers Kumbuzo Ncube, the Deputy Director for Engineering Services for the City of Bulawayo, who will largely look at the local context. Then at the national level, probably touching even the global level, we have Mr. Washington Jakarta, the Director of Climate Change Department in the Ministry of Lands, Agriculture, Water, Climate and Rural Resettlement. And then we have the pleasure of having Leah Wanambwa Naes, Senior Policy Officer in the Division of Environment, Climate Change, Water, and Land Management at the African Union Commission. She will also help us in terms of bringing in the regional context. Without much further ado, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to invite engineers Kumbuzo Ncube to take us on with his presentation. How we are going to do it, we are going to allow them to present, and we hopefully should be able to leave a little bit of time at the end for you as participants to be able to field in your questions. So there is a facility for you to be able to raise your questions, but also I trust that you can also be putting it on our messages so that we are able to actually be able to pick up the questions and field them to the various speakers. So we allow them to make the presentations, then we will actually engage in a discussion later. So without much further ado, engineers Kumbuzo Ncube could take us on.
By now. Okay, thank you, Bongiwe. Yeah, so in the context of Bulawayo City Council, we'll start off with the dams, the 6 supply dams that we have in the city. You notice that on the second slide, what we have is that of the 6 dams that have been, of the 6 dams that are supplying water to the city, 3 of them have been decommissioned. And of those 3, 2 are expected to be decommissioned by next year, March and September, respectively. We can see that 2013, 2012, and 2016 have also been bad in terms of our rainfall. To this day, we have not been getting I think our network is a bit bad. Hello. I think we can go to the next slide. Okay, in terms of the impact of climate change, the trend in terms of water storage in our dams has been actually declining. 2018 to 2020, you can notice that it's actually steadily going down. And even on the next slide, as you notice on the catchment area as well, the water that we've been receiving in the catchment areas is showing that whatever runoff that we have been experiencing or receiving, this is Inyankuni River, is actually steadily been going down from 1966 to 2010. You can see that the trend is actually a bit worrying, as the trend is showing that it's slowly going down. This also can be seen on the next slide, where we're saying now, what is it that we are proposing as the mitigation projects? Since 2019 February, we've been doing water shedding. We have a rule that we use to introduce water shedding, and this is what has informed us that we needed to start water shedding to start conserving whatever water that we have in the city. Rehabilitation of bores, we have so far done 110 plus bores rehabilitated across the city for the public. Water bowsering as well has been one of them. Installation of water kiosks, to date 23 have been installed across the city. We then have water being ferried through water bowser to this. Installation of elevated water tanks at schools and clinics through our development partners, and bore drilling. Some have been equipped. Slide. These are some of the installations that we've had at some of the institutions, and these are some of the water kiosks. As you can see, mostly they are in the high density areas and in the high-lying areas where we have not been receiving water. So these are the interventions that we have and currently ongoing in the city. What are the water demand management projects that we have ongoing? This is just, I'm going to just pass through this, showing some of the major projects that we have across in the city. At the dams there, these are the booster stations by installing new pumps to improve on raw water delivery. And as we go on with the pictures, you can be clicking the pictures as I talk. The next pictures are also showing you the different interventions that we have. We've got water mains renewal, we've got meter replacement, putting new pipes. This is all in a way of reducing non-revenue water, the leaks. We want to reduce the leaks and also be able to account for whatever we're giving or supplying water to our residents. Hence the new meters. Sold in some of the households. Then what are the water augmentation projects that we've proposed? So the short-term water augmentation projects that we've proposed, and some are already ongoing. The bores at Rochester, 15 of these bores have already been rehabilitated and are already giving us about 9 to 10 megaliters of water. We have an ongoing project at Epping Forest, which is an extension of Rochester. 20 high-yielding bores are supposed to be equipped and should be giving us 10 megaliters of water in addition. But currently, those that have been equipped are giving us about 4.5 megaliters of water to give a total of 14 to 14.5 megaliters of water from Nyamandovu. This is what is currently coming into the city, and we are supplying our residents through the Magwego Reservoir from this supply of water from the groundwater. The next slide. Then what are the proposed intermediate projects that we are looking at? We have Kami water recycling as one of the climate resilient projects, which we think it can be a project that can be used to supply water, probably even for industry and for other uses as well, to replace whatever clear water that we are supplying the same industry. Exploration of the Matopo aquifer. We can actually realize 30 to 40 megaliters of water, but a feasibility study is required first to make sure that we are certain with the amount of water or the yield of this aquifer. And the extension of the aquifer, Nyamandovu aquifer towards sawmills is another possibility where we can actually realize about 20 megaliters of water. So these are some of the proposed intermediate projects for consideration by the city in terms of mitigating against the drought and climate change. Next slide. Then in terms of long-term projects, we've got the WASHen project. This is a long-term project. So in terms of water harvesting, as one of the climate change initiatives or project proposals, is that as a city, we can harness water from WASHen, and it is work in progress at 39% at the moment. And it has the potential to supply about 147 megaliters of water per day to the city. Then the areas of focus for Bulawayo City Council, I think I've mentioned about the extension of the aquifer towards sawmills, and I've mentioned Kami water recycling, and another one is the replacement of leaks, valves, which is already work in progress. Then ring fencing of the water account, or making sure that we have an independent or rather a ring-fenced water account to improve in terms of grant funding and support for more infrastructural projects towards improving water supply to the city. Then the current strategies that we have, we continuously do awareness campaigns on water conservation, the leaks, the valve replacement, as some of the initiatives that we are already side of the roof and one on the other side. You can actually harvest about 400 liters of water per day, which gives, which is slightly equal to, almost equal to the household allocation, which the city is actually giving water per household of 450. So for the next 4 months, if we've got good rains, we are serving 4 months of water to these high density areas. So the city can actually save that water supply, which was supposed to be used for flushing and other household chores, which can now be used using rain instead of water that is being supplied and treated from the city of Bulawayo. So this is just an example of one household and how much water it can be saved in the next 4 months if we then positively look at water harvesting as one of the climate change resilient projects as a city at household level across probably about 80 to 100,000 properties. City bore rehabilitation is one of the projects that we are currently looking at, and it's ongoing and across the city with the support of different partners. Otherwise, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Engineer Ngube, for that. Apologies, I think we had a bit of cuts in terms of the presentation. Hopefully those that may have questions that can help to maybe bring a bit of clarity to his presentation, we will be able to usher it to that. So allow me to invite Mr. Washington Jakata. My apologies in terms of the ministry that I mentioned. I think I mentioned an old ministry. His ministry is actually called Ministry of Environment, Climate, Tourism, and Hospitality Industry. So allow me to invite Mr. Jakata to give us his presentation. Mr. Jakata.
Thank you very much, colleagues and Rizeli. Actually, the issues of climate change are very pertinent to the country and very evident through climate extremes like floods, especially those that are climate and cyclone related. You know, of late we have been hit by Cyclone Idai in the past few years, which really ravaged eastern Zimbabwe, and Cyclone Dineo, which traversed Zimbabwe up to the Matabeleland North areas as well as Matabeleland South, and the Cyclone Elene, which have caused also extensive droughts, which are quite evident that these occurrences had never been experienced before. We are also experiencing a lot of flash flooding that is happening in the cities, in some localities that close to rivers, floodplains, among others. Also, heat waves have become very common, and violent storms, windstorms, hailstorms, among others. But what is more critical are the water deficits that already Engineer Skumbuzo is outlined in his presentation. There are some slow onset events such as droughts, which we are also experiencing as a country, resulting in long-term water stress and shortages, and even in some cases, non-availability of this water. This is affecting especially the southern provinces of Zimbabwe, which is Matabeleland South, including North as well, Masvingo province, and parts of Manicaland, especially to the far south extreme. So all these are exacerbating, the impacts and the causing socioeconomic malperformances. So vulnerabilities of urbanites as well as rural communities, including industry, who depend on climate sensitive sectors, is an issue that we need to look at on a very serious note. This is partly due to, that is in terms of the high level of vulnerability due to over-reliance on one, rain-fed agriculture and natural resources. Secondly, over-reliance on climate-sensitive economic enterprises. Also limited technologies as well as limited infrastructural and institutional capacities. The issue of climate proofing, our infrastructure is one area that requires urgent attention. I think you notice the country is noticing a lot of disasters which are linked to infrastructure destruction and infrastructure being destroyed, not because of the design itself, but mostly because of the lack of incorporation of the current changes that are taking place in terms of climate change. So when we talk about climate change itself and its impacts on the socio-economic sectors, four narratives come to mind. One, the spatial nature of the risk, then the cross-cutting nature of the water sector, because without water, nothing moves. Then the urban climate risk complexity itself, because the urban, you have got the residents, you have got the industry, you have got the infrastructure, among other issues. And then also finally, projections of the future, that precipitation and water resources will decline or will decrease. These are some of the narratives that really come to mind when we are discussing these issues. So the interlinkages between these will compound the risks for Zimbabwe's industrial productivity. Development of industry is already affected by water shortages. We've even heard about the declining water from 2018 up to the current in the city of Bulawayo. Quite a number of cities are water stressed, and in some cases, water has just been depleted. There's no water now in some of the urban areas like Beirut. Same as Bulawayo also is terribly impacted, among others. So areas really mostly impacted by the impact of climate change, declining water resources, Matabeleland South, Matabeleland North, and in Masvingo provinces. These are the hardest hit areas in terms of water availability, according to the assessments along the lines of climate change. Matabeleland North and South indicates the highest average of drought events at this stage. So what do you anticipate in the future? So these areas which I've just mentioned also are very high drought-prone areas in terms of exposure, also to extreme drought events. They are very, very susceptible, meaning to say that interventions need to be looked at very seriously in these areas. So perhaps most obviously, the availability and access to water is strongly correlated to agricultural productivity and consequently to the downstream industries. If we have already been following up on the issues to do with agroecological zones, there have been some shifts in agroecological zones with some region 5 areas expanding, as well as the agroecological regions 4, which have got very little rainfall, in some cases below 400 millimeters per annum, expanding in terms of geographical extent. So with the projections of drier conditions in future, what is there right now in our studies and what we are also observing, most of the industry will be affected in one nature or the other, including even tourism, hydropower, electricity generation as well. We noticed in the past 4 years, 5 years, what happened with the Kariba Dam. The water levels have gone so low, irrespective of other reasons, but upstream, also droughts have been observed in Angola, in DRC, in western Zambia, which is the catchment of the Zambezi River, which flows into the Kariba Dam. So the industry and the commercial sector also relies heavily on availability of water, also from hydropower. Zimbabwe's primary form of energy generation, electricity. You know, what is of concern when we look at the industry and when we look at the current status of water resources, when we look at the current situation with respect to the global dynamics of the climate change agenda, with the global forces, the United Nations, the big countries, the EU, individual countries like France, Germany, and other countries calling for the phasing out of coal use and our heavy reliance on coal, both for electricity generation and also for our use in our boilers, among other things. Especially when we talk and think of issues moving into the future. Climate change impacts on water itself are a direct threat to economic performance of the country, because once we are forced or pushed into moving out of coal use, then we have to rely more on hydropower generation. And with the declining precipitation, which is anticipated in the next in the future, even medium to long term future, then it means as a country will be in a very, very serious situation. We need really to look at all the possible alternatives in order to ensure that in the industry and industrial development still continues in the wake of climate change. So successful and sustainable management and use of water can thus also yield socioeconomic opportunities throughout the wider system, with numerous cross-cutting and cross-sectoral co-benefits. Industries shall be called upon to carry out energy and water use efficiency audits as we move into the future. As a department, we've managed to just pilot in some of the 10 biggest industries in the country audits, water use and energy efficient audits, to see how efficient we are using, because water that we use, it has to be pumped by electricity, and this electricity is to be generated one way or the other, including also using coal. And we want to see how we could minimize on the demand for electricity with improved water use and energy efficiency, in order for us to start economizing already on the meager resources that we have. Indeed, it could be argued that water may have a significant influence on development indicators related to both poverty reduction and the climate change activities for Zimbabwe, as we endeavor to become a climate resilient and low carbon economy in line with the National Development Strategy 1, which was recently launched by His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Zimbabwe, Comrade E.D. Mnangagwa. So these are some of my insights into where we are, where we envisage going into the future with respect to climate change, just in a nutshell. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jakat. I think it's quite a lot, and it's a big area of discussion. So we will reserve the questions for a bit later. So with that, allow me to invite Leah to take us on with their presentation. Like I said, Leah is the Senior Policy Officer, Division of Environment, Climate Change, Water and Land Management at the African Union. Leah.
Good afternoon, everyone. I just realized my battery was running out, but I'll try to finish before then. So yes, I'm working at the African Union Commission and mainly focusing on climate change, but I also work on wildlife conservation and biodiversity issues. The problem of water is not limited to Zimbabwe. It's in fact a global issue, as we all know, and most of Africa is affected by this as well, the water scarcity. The pressure on water is not just from climate change. It is also coming from increase in population. The more our population increases, the water resources are not increasing. So there's the issue of population growth, which is affecting the water in addition to climate change. We also have other aspects which are man-made, for example, deforestation, especially of water catchment areas. The deforestation plays two roles here. It's impacting on climate and is also impacting on the water catchment areas. So we have that in perspective as I move on to some of the points I would like to highlight. We all know, again, water is life. Without water, we cannot even have basic needs like agriculture. That all depends on water. We also need it for drinking and all the sanitation issues, especially now during COVID. We have realized that water is our first line of defense. There's all this talk of hand washing. So water is kind of our lifeline at the moment and has always been. We have the issues of, of course, I mentioned food security. Conflict is also an impact on a water perspective. This is conflict between pastoralists and farmers, and this affects some of the countries up north in the Sahel and Sahara region. We know the issues in the Lake Chad. We know about the issues in South Sudan and formerly in the Sudan itself. And all these kinds of conflict are triggered by climate change, impacting on the natural vegetation and the water sources, and of course leads to conflicts between farmers and pastoralists. We also have the human-wildlife conflict. I guess this also might apply to Zimbabwe, for example. When our animals in the parks do not have water, they will move out to try and get water somewhere else. So we have that element of the human, when the link between the wildlife populations and the humans, also creating a bit of tension between the populations and conservation groups, for example. Of course, the grazing is usually for grazing, competition is for grazing land and water sources. We have had in the previous presentation the issue of water, power shortage. This is from the low amount of water in the dams. But then what is causing the shortage of water in the dams? It could be also linked to agricultural practices upstream. and a lot of industrial use, domestic and industrial use upstream. So that would also contribute, in addition to the droughts and the change in precipitation, there's also the use that we are also contributing to. So without this water in the dams, of course, we have this power rationing, and which is not always good, especially for small scale traders. I'm thinking here, and also the bigger industries. When we have these kinds of shortages across the continent, of course, we know the most affected are those, the small hairdressers, the mechanics, and all these people whose businesses solely depend on power. So without power, of course, they have nothing their incomes are limited on that day, and they will end up going to other land-based activities like let's say deforestation, for example, because now their source of income is coming from electricity, and now that is gone. So for those 72 hours, they're supposed to be making an income somehow, and it's not there. We also have the issue of transboundary conflict and tension. We know the issues surrounding the River Nile right now. It's a big challenge. We hope it will be resolved one day or sooner than later. There is, of course, without mentioning, but of course, there's the issue of the countries downstream who solely depend on the River Nile, for example, for their agriculture and all kinds of activities. And then we have the countries upstream which need the river for their electricity and also for their livelihood. So these kinds of tensions are there. And what is causing this? Again, it's the issue of water, and what is reducing the water is the amount of precipitation which has changed due to climate change, and also due to some of the activities that we ourselves are involved in. So what kind of adaptation measures are countries putting in place? So we have, of course, two ways of approaching. We have the adaptation to climate change induced water scarcity, and also adaptation to the water itself, the water usage, and how to better make use of, to better have water efficiency, if we call it that. So there's a shift towards better farming methods. There is a way, there are new technologies where farming does not require farmers to use so much water or waste so much water. This is more like targeted irrigation methods. So improvements in agriculture and farming, and through the better irrigation systems. We've seen countries in the deserts like Israel producing food. So and they have less water than other countries, and they still manage to do through more efficient agricultural practices. There's also projects on rainwater harvesting. There are efforts across several countries to put water tanks and gutters to collect the rain, because when it rains, then all that water is usually wasted. So these water harvesting projects are usually done in schools, communities, and also in individual homesteads. This helps a lot, especially in times of drought when there's not enough water. And the tanks are usually sometimes underground, and of course some on the surface. Then we have early warning systems, and this is very critical, because if we know in advance, if the water ministry knows in advance that the rains, the next rains are not will be delayed or will be less than expected or more than expected, then the relevant ministries will plan better and plan ahead of time, as opposed to waiting until it's too late to start taking action. So the early warning systems, and this needs strong collaboration with the meteorology stations, and also we have these regional institutions such as ACMAD. They provide this kind of every third month, they provide information on anticipated rainfall patterns, etc. And they even give mitigation measures and what to anticipate. They'll tell you this month, maybe you might not have electricity. Then we have the efforts aimed at protecting wetlands and water catchment areas. This is the issue I mentioned earlier about deforestation. The moment we start cutting down some of these forests, these are water catchment areas we're destroying. So efforts to protect wetlands and water catchment areas are ongoing in several countries, including where I'm from, Kenya. And massive reforestation programs are also going on. Then there's also to try and shift a little bit and diversify the sources of power. For example, going for wind and geothermal. These are not always possible, but of course, and solar. This could also be used to supplement the power produced from hydro plants. On the global perspective, we also encourage the implementation of the Paris Agreement on climate change. Most countries have NDCs, and a good number of NDCs are on the water sector, and also agriculture, etc., and mitigation. So by implementing the Paris Agreement, we control climate change and hopefully improve our water security. Then also we have other conventions, such as the one on biodiversity and also the ones on desertification. So if we implement the recommendations from some of these agreements, then our countries will be in a better position to handle some of these challenges when they come, and also try to prevent them from a global scale and a regional. It cannot be one country alone, because climate change does not respect boundaries. So in as much as Zimbabwe does its best, if the neighbors are not doing the same, or the other countries or the other regions in Europe and the US are not doing, we are all going to have the same challenge, at least in terms of climate change. And then we also encourage collaboration between the different ministries and sectors. For example, the Ministry of Agriculture would need to work closely with the Ministry of Water if they are not in the same ministry. Some countries, all these are scattered across different ministries, because water is being used for agriculture, for example. But then the Ministry of Water should be able to control and advise on efficiency and how to better conserve this water so it's available for all the other users. And then we have the Ministry of Forestry, which houses the water catchment areas. So if the Ministry of Forestry is not talking to the Water Ministry, then there will not be collaborative efforts to address common challenges of water. Mr. Chair just alerted me when my time is out. And of course, ministry is responsible for issues like wildlife. So we need a more sectoral, more coordination between the different sectors dealing with the issues of water, climate change, agriculture, forestry, etc. At the continental level, we have several, of course, water documents. We have the Africa Water Vision 2025, among others, which of course talk more to the issues of water and sanitation, not specifically to climate change, but they advise on issues of water efficiency, and I had it mentioned earlier, advocacy and stuff like that. I think that's mainly it, but yeah, at a personal level, we need to also take action. How long does one person take in a shower? Do we just let the tap running when brushing our teeth? So some of the awareness level needs to start from the personal level. Encourage each Zimbabwean to try and conserve water at their homes. Reduce the amount of time we are maybe opening the taps and brushing and scrubbing and cleaning floors. I know we love cleaning houses so much and taking very long showers all the time. So some of the targeted campaigns could go to this, but we'd also need to work closely with the engineer who talked of replacing the pipes. A lot of water is lost in the leakages from the supplier to the household. You find a leaking tap or a leaking pipe somewhere, pouring water for almost 24 hours out there on the road. And this is common across Africa. And then you find the taps don't close properly. Of course, in the constructions of homes, you find the toilet system, if it's not flushing, it means someone will have to press that button several times, waste buckets of water. So of course, it also comes down to the construction and how we build some of the things we use in our homes, the plumbing systems. So it's beyond from the government, it also comes down to the individuals. Of course, the water meters are good, because then if I feel I'm paying a lot for the water, I will not open the taps as freely as I would like to. But sometimes the water also is not expensive, so I might afford to open the taps. But then it cannot be too expensive because the people need it. So there's that also scenario. With that, Mr. Moderator, I'll hand you back the mic. Thank you.
Many thanks, Leah. Quite a lot of insights from the global perspective. Without much further ado, maybe, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to invite questions. I think there's a lot that has actually been covered. I don't want to water down the presentations by trying to do a summary, but there's a lot, I think, of interest that we've actually received today, straight from the City Council itself. What are the issues? What are the measures that they're actually taking to try and address the issues of water? Then going on to the national issues in terms of what Mr. Jakata mentioned on the issues of climate proofing, declining of the precipitation of water, and stretching on to what Leah has just actually covered, many issues, early warning signs, issues of wetlands and the water catchment areas. I think there's quite a lot. Allow me to invite you to maybe give me, if there are questions, there is a facility for you to raise your hands. If you click on the participants, there is one which says raise hands. You can raise your hand, then we can actually take up your question. I know that maybe before you do that, allow me to read I will read maybe the ones that are actually coming out on the charts a bit later. So maybe allow me to invite you to, if you have questions, raise your hands, then we can allow you to be unmuted and you can throw your question. So far, I am not seeing any question. I don't know whether that is the position. So with that, maybe allow me to maybe pick up the ones that have actually come through the chats, or there's someone.
Hello.
Yes, Prosper, you can go ahead.
Hello, Mr. Mtunzawa. My question, I'm not sure if yes, I'm not sure if I missed this one, but I think one of the biggest implications when we talk about climate change and water issues is the issue of impact on health issues, of which I didn't hear our panelists discussing something along those lines. Because if you look at the issue of the socio-economic right to water and to energy, and you look at the service providers like local authorities and ZESA, for instance, failing to meet these mandates to people, and we now have COVID and all these other risks that
Yeah, we seem to be having a bad connection with Prosper, but I think the issue that is bringing up is the issue of the effect of the impact of climate change on issues of health. I trust that I covered it well, Prosper, so maybe we could have a response. What we had done is to drive towards the issues of productivity and capacity utilization. So you realize that maybe there was that inclination towards covering issues of productivity and capacity utilization, not much in terms of health, but I think there's no harm in maybe one of the presenters, if they can actually come through on that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mtundu. If you allow me to respond.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, I think as per the heading that you had given us, there's a lot that can be said. It's so wide, but we sort of narrowed the presentation, and the time that was given, I think, was to talk to more of capacity utilization vis-a-vis climate change. But as you can see from the first slide,
we seem to have lost Ncube. I don't know, any maybe while maybe we are trying to get him back.
To stretch whatever resource that was there. But as you know that when even in your own household, if you have got a drum of water, if it stays for too long without if you want to now clean, if you want to fill it up, you usually have to rinse it, to waste that water, and usually that water you don't use it. So pipes have got different materials, but unfortunately we cannot afford to flush that water first, to waste. And then I think through awareness campaigns, we've said people use that water for other things.
Yeah, we seem to be having a bit of a bad connection with the Ngube. Sometimes it keeps it.
It uses waterborne system. So without water, you cannot flush. And if you pour flush, some people, you just use 5 liters. And
Right, Ngube, I think we're having a bad connection. Maybe we may need to just abort maybe the response, unless I have other responses, because it keeps cutting. So I think people are not really getting all that you're actually saying.
Maybe I could add as we wait for him to join.
Sure,
The issue
go ahead, yeah.
I maybe only touched it very briefly, so maybe it didn't come out clear. But of course,
Yes.
during this COVID, we have realized that water is our first line of defense. People need to wash their hands to protect themselves literally from this COVID. So water and sanitation is key now, especially. Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. Right, there was a chat that came through, which I thought maybe it would be good to just bring it up, where the question was, is there a way of reviving the water resources department in Zimbabwe in order to protect wetlands? Not sure if Zinwa is playing that role. I think the other contributory factor is uncontrolled mining activities where no rehabilitation takes place. I'm happy to realize that there is someone in Tando who has actually made a response and even offered a communication around that. Maybe I could just go through the response. He or she says, on wetlands management in the country, the Minister of Environment is currently developing a wetlands policy, and you are all invited to add value to the policy. Those interested on wetlands management in the country, the Minister of Environment is currently developing the policy, and you are all invited to add value. And those interested, there is an email address in nondo@ema.co.zw. So we can reach out to Ntando for further information. But in case there's any response, Mr. Jakarta, I don't know whether you also would want to add on the response that has been given.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, if it is on the wetlands, that's very true. Right now, there's the process of development of wetlands management strategy that is already kick-started, and this is in view of the fact that most of the wetlands, quite a lot of the wetlands in the country, depleted, and they've been unsustainably utilized, resulting in the impacts of the cleaning effect of the wetlands for water that is flowing into our rivers and so forth. And also, in some cases, also drying the wetlands, which would be used as a source of marginal agricultural productivity in times of these droughts. But now, this is no longer the case. So definitely there is something that is happening now. It has already started the process, like what was in the chat that was sent by another colleague. Yes. Yeah, I wanted just to touch just briefly on the issues of the health, that climate change is already, there are some signs that transmission of vector-borne diseases is on the rise because of the increases in temperatures and in some cases the flash flooding that is happening and so forth. So we are looking at a situation whereby this increase in vector-borne diseases and non-vector-borne diseases, such as cholera and other diseases, may be on the rise as well in Zimbabwe because of these variations in temperature. We've got a few studies that have already been undertaken, which have indicated clearly the relationship between climate and health. But I think more needs to be done in order for us to have a concrete position and eventually maybe a country strategy to ensure that we cushion communities from these climate-related diseases. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jakata. Maybe just to close up on that topic, there's also further information from Tando that furthermore, there are wetland management guidelines being developed by the Environmental Management Agency. To comment on the guidelines, connect with precious.magwaza@ema.co.zw. So you can be able to actually view that chat. I think it's there for everyone to see. You are able to pick up the email address if you want to actually participate or make any comments to those guidelines. So I would want us to move on. If there are any questions, I'm still able to take questions. You can raise your hand. There's a facility for you to be able to raise your hand. I would have wanted to have a better connection with Ncube because there is also a question that has come through in terms of the person, Michael Moyo, says that I did not hear any feedback on the status of the dam infrastructure currently. What is the strategy from BCC and ZINWA around the issue of siltation management activities? Maybe you could try again, Ncube. I hope we have a better connection now. I don't seem to be having Ncube. I don't know the host. Maybe you could be able to just check with the Ncube in terms of that connection. But I don't know. Maybe Mr. Jakata, I know. Oh, sorry, Ncube, you are there. Let me hear.
Okay, the 6 supply dams that we have. We once did a tour, media tour 2 weeks ago with Bulawayo representatives, and they actually realized to themselves, I mean, that there is no silt in these dams. Bulawayo dams have no silt. We've physically gone down there and people saw for themselves, and I think it has been covered in our media and newspapers to clear that there is no silt in the dams. So Bulawayo dams are not silted.
They just don't have the water.
Yes. The Gwaishanani Dam, which maybe could answer some of that question, is a project that is being managed by ZINWA, funded by government. City Council is waiting for the project to be completed to get water.
Great. Thanks, Ncube. I'm still able to take 1 or 2 more questions. Any hands?
Hi, my name is Nicholas. I'm sorry if you can hear me.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Nicholas.
Okay. So probably my question will take a policy. We'll try to ask from the policy makers and the policy implementers that are here, in particular in terms of climate change, probably directed to Mr. Jakata. Or, I know we have quite a number of policies related to implementation of climate change strategies, the national determined contributions and all those things, things that could also help combating climate change. But I don't know in terms of policy implementation on the ground, for instance, what is really happening. Are people taking some of these initiatives? Also, I know there's also a challenge of institutional silos also. For instance, maybe the Minister of Agriculture and Water not working together. How are these, how collaborative efforts actually being enhanced in order for us to realize more climate change benefits in light of the current situation?
So, Mr. Jakata, I don't know, we could get your response on that.
Thank you very much. Well, this issue really, there is quite a lot that is happening now. And I think if colleagues have got a copy of the National Development Strategy, one, it really articulates the issues of climate change quite clearly and the need for the country to move towards resilience, which already means that the government has embraced these issues of climate change. As we speak, right now, the Climate Change Management Department has been mandated to ensure that in the wake of devolution, we empower the districts, the provinces to mainstream climate change in their development planning process. And this process is going on across the whole country, leaving out no district untouched. And with respect to our obligations, also on the global platform to reduce our emissions of greenhouse gases under the Paris Agreement, which is also mandatory, there's a lot of buy-in from industry. And I mentioned the audits that we've done and also some other initiatives in the industry, in the waste sector. We're working with municipalities as well, including my colleague Skumbuzo, on how the waste sector also could contribute towards emission reductions in order for the country to meet its obligations. We are working together with the City of Harare, the City of Mtare, everyone is on board. And we've managed also, as a department, as in the Ministry of Environment, Climate, Tourism and Hospitality Industry, to mobilize further resources for the agriculture sector to really be proactive in the issues of climate change, looking at Mzingwane, Save, and Runde catchments, meaning to say we are going to be implementing climate change, climate smart agriculture programs and projects linked also to the Pumvuza and other climate smart agricultural practices in those areas. And we are working together with the Ministry of Industry. And this is a grant that we managed to secure for Southern Zimbabwe in those catchments from the Green Climate Fund. And so we are now working, there's something that is already happening on the ground. Districts are being visited now to jumpstart the process of implementing this project, which includes also resuscitation and revitalization of some of the irrigation schemes, protection of the wetlands, and the provision of solar water conveyance systems to the needy hotspot areas in terms of climate change impacts. So these are some of the activities that are ongoing and on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jakata, for that response. I think quite clear. All right. What we may want to do now, we are past our time now. We started slightly late, but I would not want to take anyone for granted and assume that you have nothing else to do. But allow me maybe, if with your indulgence, just to take one more question. If there's one pending question, then we will allow our presenters maybe just parting shots, brief parting shots, not a presentation. Any further question that we may want to take? Just one more. Great. I don't seem to see anyone with a question. So allow me to invite, I don't know, Ngube, if you have got any parting shots, anything that you'd want to just give our audience before we close the conference.
Okay. Maybe to say that we currently
Yeah, unfortunately, I think the connection there still seems not to be too good. We seem to have lost Ngube again. Mr. Jakata, any parting shots?
Just to inform colleagues that our next movements, apart from mainstreaming climate change into development planning, we are now going to be working with the local government and urban setups to ensure that we have a circular economy in terms of greening the cities, greening the urban areas, to ensure that we reduce, we reuse, and we also reduce our emissions of the greenhouse gases towards our vision 2030 of greening Zimbabwe. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jakata. Leah, I hope you are still there. You spoke something that intrigued me, the issue of the Israeli efficiency. I hope one of these days we'll have an opportunity maybe to share a bit more. What can we learn as Africa? They use less water, but there's more productivity. So it would be nice to even talk about that. But look, let me not preempt what you probably would want to give as a parting shot. What are your parting shots to the participants here?
Thank you for the tip on what could be the parting shot. No, I think the problem we have as a continent is we underestimate, we have too much resources, so we just use it as if it's a free, never-ending resource. So we know now water is a scarce resource, like everything else, like our fishing and everything is getting finished, depleted through unsustainable practices. But if we learn the art of efficiency and just applying the right technologies at the right places, I think we'll be able to do. And it starts with the agriculture sector. If you transform that, I've seen people producing lots in just a small space. If you take also another example is Holland. It's probably the smallest country in Europe. And then they feed almost the whole world from agriculture. Yes, they have lots of water, but they're making use of space efficiently. So I think our challenge is, let's see how we can efficiently use the little resources we have to produce more. And also,
Great.
yeah, not just for water, for everything, because everything is connected. If we don't fight climate change, we will not have anything else. We will not have water, we will not have natural resources, the wildlife sector, etc.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for that. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been a pleasure being your moderator for this conference. The belief is that this conference was being recorded, and hopefully we'll be able to actually get a copy of that. I'm not sure in terms of maybe just a written summary whether that will be there, but I hope we will be assisted with that. But allow me to thank our conveners, Zimbabwe International Trade Fair, which was in partnership with the Ministry of Environment, Climate, Tourism and Hospitality Industry, as well as the City of Bulawayo. Thank you so much for putting this together. It's been a wonderful time of discussions. We trust that we will actually be able to actually pick up critical issues a bit later in the conferences that will actually come. Otherwise, thank you so much for your time. And thank you so much also for allowing us to just go over slightly over the time that we had agreed. I thank you.